Hello friends, I am Dr. Pranav Khoche from Nutan Vidya Prasarak Mandal's Arts, Commerce and Science College, Lasargaon. The topic of today's lecture is types of poetry. Part 1, because in this lecture we are going to discuss ode, ballad and sonnet. And in the next lecture we will discuss other types. And obviously the title of the paper is Appreciating Poetry, and it is prescribed under SYBA Discipline Specific Course BAC 2A. Friends, types of poetry are defined, or they are according to some particular features of those poems. So, types of poetry are classified according to their form or their content, that is a typical subject matter, or sometimes length. It also comes under form. When we talk about form, some types of poetry are according to their stanza forms or rhyme scheme, or whether they are narrative poems or they are dramatic poems or they are lyrical poems. At the same time, subject matters also decide the type of poetry. For example, elegy is a poem to mourn the death of someone near and dear. So, expressing sorrow, mourning the death of someone is a subject of poetry. Or ballad, it is a narrative poem. At the same time, it talks about some battles, wars or voyages or supernatural things or unreturned love. So the point is, type of poetry can also be decided from its subject matter. As said earlier, in this lecture we are going to discuss ode, ballad and sonnet. The first type is ode. Ode is a lyrical poem which is serious in tone, and it is usually addressed to someone or something. 3 points are important here. Lyrical poem, it's a lyrical poem. The tone of the poem is serious, and usually, not always, but usually it is addressed to someone or something. Many times such an ode which is addressed to someone or something is said to be in the form of address. Romantic poets, many romantic poets revived this ancient form, because one of the aims or objectives of the romantic poets was to revive the old or ancient forms of poetry. Revived means they gave life to that particular form again. They used those forms again. They wrote in those particular forms of poetry again. And in that way they revived. They gave life to that particular form. Especially John Keats and P.B. Shelley mastered this form, which was originally invented by the Greek poet Pindar. Therefore, his poems or his odes are also called Pindaric odes. P.B. Shelley's Ode to the West Wind now has been addressed to the powerful west wind. Ode to the West Wind by Percy by Shelley has been addressed to the powerful west wind, which is influential on nature in the European continent. Okay, another of Shelley's odes is To a Skylark. It is addressed to the bird, a skylark. Ode to Psyche is also famous ode by P.B. Shelley. John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn, Ode to Nightingale, and Ode to Autumn are more famous than his other odes. So, ode is basically, now you when you see the titles of these poems, Ode to the West Wind, To a Skylark has been prescribed in your syllabus, or Ode to Psyche, or John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn, which is in your syllabus, Ode to Nightingale, Ode to Autumn. The titles suggest that these odes have been addressed. These two tells you that these odes have been addressed to these particular entities. For example, West Wind, Skylark, Psyche, Grecian Urn, Nightingale, or Autumn. Therefore, in most of the odes, we find personification used abundantly, frequently, because these non-human things have been addressed as human beings. Okay. I hope you have understood this first type of poetry, that is ode. The next type of poetry is ballad. Traditionally, this form was rendered only orally. That particular form, the old ballad, is now called the folk ballad, right? Folk means people. So that from folk culture, culture of the people, this ballad was sung. It has been derived from that particular folk culture. Similar to ballad, in Marathi there is one particular poetic form which is called povada. It is quite similar to ballad. Why, we will see now. The modern ballad, revived by the Romantic poets, is in written form. So as Romantic poets revived ode, they also revived ballads. And it is called modern ballad, which is not in oral form but it is in written form. Ballad is a long narrative poem. First of all, length is little bit more than other poems. It's a narrative poem, that means it tells a tale of something. Ballad tells a story of something or someone. So usually that narrates a tale, those ballads narrate a tale, that is story of a hero or battles, wars, unreturned love, which is also called forfeited love, voyages means journeys made by the sea, or the supernatural things like magicians or ghosts or other supernatural entities. Therefore, I compared ballad with Marathi or Maharashtrian povada, because as ballad is a narrative poem telling the story or narrating the story of a hero, in povada as well it is a story of a hero that is narrated. But unlike povada, ballad also describes or narrates battles or wars, unreturned love, voyages, that is journeys made by the sea, or the element of the supernatural. The Ballad of Sir Patrick Spens is an example of a traditional ballad form. It is a folk ballad, and afterwards some anonymous poets wrote them down. They also edited that ballad or added or deleted. They must have edited and added and deleted some details. But basically, originally, this ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, is traditional ballad form. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by the Romantic poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge narrates a story of a mariner, that is, a sailor on the ship, and his experiences, his voyage on the sea. It also narrates how he kills a bird called albatross, and because of that, because he kills a natural form, a natural creature, many unprecedented dangers follow this particular mariner, and how he returns or how he survives from those dangers. That has been narrated in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Another famous ballad of romantic poet John Keats is La Belle Dame Sans Merci. La Belle Dame Sans Merci means, in English, the beautiful lady without mercy. This ballad narrates a story of a knight in the king's court, and he meets a lady who has some magic, who has spell over this knight, and this particular ballad narrates his experiences with that particular lady, with that lady. Generally, not always, but generally, the ballads in English are sorrowful or serious in tone. One of the most famous, most well-known poetic form or type of poetry is sonnet. Sonnet is a poem of 14 lines with systematic rhyme scheme and divided into carefully planned stanzas. So when we were talking about discussing types of poetry, I told you that poetry has been classified into types according to their form also. So sonnet is such specific example because sonnet is a poem of only 14 lines and it has a systematic rhyme scheme, and it has been also divided into carefully planned stanzas. So sonneteer or the poet who writes sonnet, he has to think, he has to use his all poetic craft to write a sonnet. This form was invented by Petrarch in Italy. The poet who invented this form was Petrarch. That's why Italian sonnets are also called Petrarchan sonnets, because he was the master, he was the person or the poet who wrote sonnets, right, for the first time. Later English poets adapted this form, right? Afterwards, English poets, especially Romantic poets and Elizabethan poets before them, adapted this form very well. Poets like John Donne, William Shakespeare, William Wordsworth, and many others have mastered this particular form of poem. William Shakespeare made innovations in the sonnet by altering the usual rhyme scheme ABAB, BCBC, CDCD, and EE by ABAB, CDCD, EFEF, GG. Let's see this rhyme scheme again. This particular rhyme scheme ABAB, BCBC, CDCD, and EE was mostly used by Petrarchan sonneteers or those poets who wrote in Petrarchan style. But Shakespeare was an innovator, a true innovator, as a dramatist and as a poet, and he altered that rhyme scheme that must have required quite a mastery over the form. So he altered the rhyme scheme to ABAB, CDCD, EFEF, and GG. Therefore, his sonnets or English sonnets also take the name of Shakespearean sonnets. Generally, sonnet form is divided in an octave and a sestet. So after rhyme scheme and after knowing that sonnet is a poem of 14 lines, let's see the structure of a sonnet. So generally it is divided in an octave. Octave means 8 lines. When we will discuss stanza forms, you will know it again. Octave is a stanza of 8 lines. And a sestet means a stanza of 6 lines. So 8 plus 6, 14. Or it is divided into 3 quatrains. Quatrains means a stanza of 4 lines. Stanza of 4 lines. So 3 quatrains and a final couplets. So 3 quatrains means 4 into 3, that is 12 lines, and the final couplet 2 lines. Couplet is a generally rhyming group of lines, group of 2 lines. So final couplet. Accordingly, the change of mood or tone takes place in the sestet of or the final couplet of a sonnet, which is also called a volta. Let's discuss this structure again. Sonnet is divided in an octave, that is 8 lines, and a sestet, that is 6 lines, or it is divided into 3 quatrains and the final couplet. But overall, always the sonnet consists 14 lines. Accordingly, according to the division of the sonnet, the change of mood or tone takes place in the sestet if the sonnet is divided into an octave and a sestet, or it also takes place in the final couplet if the sonnet is divided into 3 quatrains and the final couplet. It is also called, this change of mood or change of tone is also called a volta, because volta means a turn. Here are some examples of a sonnet. Sonnet 3 by William Shakespeare, which has been prescribed in your syllabus. But William Shakespeare also wrote total 154 sonnets. They are generally addressed to a young lady or to a man, and they deal with love themes. Most of his sonnets deal with love themes. On His Blindness is another very, very famous sonnet by John Milton, who also wrote an epic named Paradise Lost, and a beautiful sonnet, Batter My Heart by John Donne. Obviously, there are hundreds of sonnets written by many poets, but these are some famous examples of this particular form. So friends, in this lecture, we discussed these 3 types of poetry. Ode, that is a serious poem, lyrical and serious poem addressed to someone or something. Ballad, that is a long narrative poem, talking or telling the story, narrating the story of a hero or wars, battles, supernatural, unreturned love, etc. And a very systematic and well-formed type of poetry, that is sonnet. In the next lecture, we will be discussing other types of poetry like epic, dramatic monologue, lyric, and elegy. So friends, if you have any problem regarding this lecture, or if you have any doubts, please call me, please contact me. Share this video lecture with your friends, as many friends as possible. Like this lecture if you have really liked. If you have any doubts, you can ask those doubts in comments as well, or you can send me a personal message. Thank you friends. We'll meet in the next lecture.